Hello and welcome to my video on the worst unban appeal on Earth by me. There's going to be some extreme profanity on screen during this video, but I'm not going to say any extreme profanity. I'm going to start by talking about what an unban appeal is. The idea is that you've already done something bad, and the community has already decided to punish you. You're not going to get anywhere most of the time by insisting that you didn't do it, because if you were banned, everybody's pretty sure that you actually did it. Your best shot is to convince the community that while you did do it, you're not going to do it again. You understand the rule and you believe that the process that banned you is legitimate, which is very hard for some people. Our first few threads are not going to be from Earth, they're actually going to be from space, and specifically, they're going to be from Space Station 13. We'll get back to Earth a little bit later, but for now, I want to show you Bonamp. Bonamp is a guy who created a character on the Space Station 13, or actually Space Station 14 server Wisden, whose name is Adolf Rizzler. And Adolf Rizzler is, of course, clearly a cryptogram for Adolf Hitler, and people didn't like that. His argument, which he's obviously thought about, is that he's related to somebody named Adolf Heinrich von Arnim-Boitzenburg, which might even be the name of a guy. I don't know. I would assume if there's a Wikipedia page, it's a guy. Anyway, he accuses other people of racism for insisting that Adolf Rizzler is an unacceptable name. There are several people who engage, obviously with some level of facetiousness, with his claim that this name is not intended to be offensive, while clearly it is. And eventually he is responded to by the moderation team, which in perfect German, very eloquent German, extremely formal German, tells him that he needs to not do that, which, he needs to not do that. That's true. His whole strategy was to insist on a thing that's obviously not true with the hope that, despite the fact that it was obviously not true, he would be able to convince people that it was. We've got here Poppy. Poppy is a person who decided to take a label gun and smack a little label onto people that said, I'm gay, which, kind of implies that it's bad to be gay. Or maybe it doesn't, but probably it does. They were told not to and they were rude. And the admin team is going to respond to them by insisting to them that they should not have done this in the way that you would expect them to. And they will continue to frivolously insist that the admin team's response is literally fascist and that they should be ashamed of themselves. And that's very silly. They continue for a while. This is very rude and very insistent. And they argue for several pages and they are ultimately still banned. There are probably some people who would take the argument that they're making if it can be rendered into a coherent argument. There are probably people who would take it seriously, but I don't know any such people. We've got for our next contestant, this man named his character Varg Vikernes, which is the name of a National Socialist black metal musician who murdered one of his bandmates. Murdered is slightly in dispute. There's an argument that it was self-defense, but I don't take that argument very seriously personally. So Varg Vikernes did a bad thing, and this guy thought that he should name his character after him. He's also saying a bunch of dubious things about his older brother, who is at this point dyslexic, but as the posts develop, his older brother turns out to be autistic. These are all made in separate threads, by the way. He just, like, every time they close his topic, he makes a new topic. His brother is autistic, dyslexic, has ADHD, and is saying horrible things about white people, which is strange. I don't know why anybody would post such a thing, other than to, I guess, be banned such that they would end up in a thread like this one. But okay, so this person's brother, or possibly this person himself, continue to do this with the username Varg Vikernes, the National Socialist black metal musician, and they do argue, and maybe you find it convincing that they argue, that his music is unfairly demonized and that his music is actually a lot better than you might think it is, which is so much not the problem. I mean, I think his music is good too. It's just the fact that he's a Nazi murderer is a big problem. Anyway, they apologize and admit that they should not have named their character Varg Vikernes, and there are some people who could have been offended, which is saying a lot. And then we have this guy. For some reason, I put this guy in the video. I don't know. This guy just told the admins to break him completely and then just posted. Like, he actually says some really nasty stuff that I didn't include in these posts. I decided to Google for a while. It turns out this guy has actually learned to speak English really well, but his politics have remained exactly like this. So isn't that shameful? So we're going to move on. We want to understand why it is that these people can't do it. And the conclusions that I've come to, for one thing, are that these people deeply lack self-awareness. I think that's really common. I probably lack self-awareness, at least in certain situations. The other thing I've concluded is that many of them are not actually trying to use the unban process to get unbanned. To be fair, some of these people would not be unbanned regardless. These people who feel that it's inevitable in many cases are probably correct. But other people actually could get unbanned. I think that several of the people from the first few threads could have been unbanned. For instance, I think Poppy could have been unbanned if they explained that they didn't realize that their joke was being taken that way. Actually, I think all three of them could have been unbanned. I could be wrong about that. The first guy was definitely going to have a rough time of it. We're going to go on to one more Space Station 13 appeal, and I think this is one that demonstrates uniquely bad human characteristics. This is Unarmed Toast. Unarmed Toast was banned for living. I don't think that that's a real reason to be banned. As you can see, they've clearly misunderstood the appeal, the ban reason, which actually said appeal this if you want to live, the implication being that they will die if they don't appeal this. This is a moderator directly saying you will get outcomes that allow you to continue playing if you respond. Maybe that's a little bit of a stretch, but I don't think it's significant given that I've seen how Goon Station, which is the server that this is from, operated at this time. Anyway, the moderator is upset that they call the guy a slur, which is of course correct. The moderator has asked that they stop doing that, and they get a confusing response that contains several elements. One of them is that calling another person the F slur is for this person roughly equivalent to calling a person the N slur, which I think is worrying. I don't think, for one thing, I think that calling somebody the N slur non-affectionately would be horrible, but even doing so affectionately with somebody who's not comfortable with that would be really pushing it. Anyway, they're asserting that the moderator didn't contact them and that there's no proof that they did. They are asserting that they had no idea why they were banned, and therefore it is the moderator's problem, and the moderator must have done something wrong, given that they don't know what happened. When I think that it's entirely plausible, given the rest of the evidence in the thread, that they would have known why this happened. I think that they are being disingenuous. They are asking now that another admin should be put in charge of their case, and that their case should be litigated by a third party that looks at screenshots of, I guess, them doing the thing or them not doing the thing. I don't know what evidence this person could actually present in favor of the idea that they didn't do the thing, because they could have done the thing at a different time. I think that probably they did do the thing, but if this were to actually be done like a trial, all of the evidence would be presented by the other person. That would be my assumption. Anyway, they want to do mock trial, and they really want to do mock trial, in fact. Another moderator pops in, given that they've asked that a third party litigate this, and says not to do the thing. The moderator says that this could be easy for them if they just accept that the process is valid and that the rule is valid and that they won't do it again, which I think is reasonable. Anyway, the third party who has arrived, they immediately respond to that third party by telling them to get the fuck out. They're not the appealer. And they add that they clearly were not doing this with the intent of discriminating. The moderator asks them to clarify. They agree that they meant it, but not in a homophobic way, which is certainly a defense that you would hear from other members of the community. I think that Magic Mountain's interpretation of why this is a problem is exactly correct. And Unarmed Toast's response is also exactly correct, right until they switch to this disingenuous wall of text, which says that the F slur actually means a bundle of wood, which is shameful. Anyway, they assert that this moderator is not being reasonable, and they want a third party, having already told the third party who arrived to please leave. They were more rude than that. Anyway, the moderator says, look, I'm enforcing the letter of the law like a robot here. I am not in the wrong. You should stop doing the thing that you do. I think that this is useful and even important, because while it is robotic and uncharismatic to just insist that they're only following a rule, that the rule is not violable, it is the letter of the rule, this creates a clear set of incentives for the person that would cause the person to disengage from their behavior. and makes it more obvious that it's strange when they don't do that. I think that the general strategy Magic Mountain is using, which is to be very mildly passive aggressive and condescending, but generally to make the stakes very clear and to treat this disingenuous person like they're being sincere, I think that's a very good strategy. I think that the person who is being disingenuous in this situation, the appealer in this thread, is somebody who is in denial about how disingenuous they're being. And that creates incredible value in the moderator clarifying to the person, this is what a person who is sincerely saying what you're saying would say. This is what I would take you to mean if you were sincere, such that it's more obvious that there's a contradiction. I do think the person is unlikely to ever take Magic Mountain seriously, but I think that both for bystanders and for a subset of people who are being manipulative without understanding how manipulative they're being, this set of social strategies is likely to be effective. I do think this is also a set of strategies used by people who are power tripping, but I think that in this case, it's totally merited for Magic Mountain to be flexing some power on this guy. Anyway, the person recognizes the condescension in the post and apologizes, or rather asserts that they're apologizing in about the least apologetic way imaginable. This is basically the response I would expect from somebody who both wants to complete the letter of the process and responds to like the mild derision of Magic Mountain's post by rejecting it and responding in this very egoistic, unhumble way. Magic Mountain continues to insist that the person is responding in an egoistic and unhumble way, which is my more verbose way of saying that they clearly don't think they did anything wrong, but which I think gets at part of why they're bristling so hard at this person. Anyway, the person is phrasing their acceptance and understanding of the rule as a bizarre question. Like, yes, that's clearly the reason for the rule, and they insist that there's not much deeper that you can get, which maybe there's not. Maybe literally it is bad to do things that would have the tendency to hurt other people's feelings. Anyway, the person now accuses the moderator of being on a vendetta, which is, I think, a really strange way to respond to somebody who's just continuing a conversation by making additional comments about the thing the conversation is about, which respond to, like, all of the conversational responses Magic Mountain has issued have been completely ordinary responses, so it's very strange. Anyway, another third party arrives to point out that the person asserts that they haven't been using slurs, but literally in the post where they asserted this, they used a slur. And they respond by rejecting a second third party while continuing to insist that the original person that they spoke to should replace themselves with a third party. I do not understand what that would mean. Gorilla My Dreams points out that if they were being sincere, they would have said something completely absurd, and therefore they're not being sincere. I think that this is just on the money. It's correct. And while I find this thread infuriating, I think that it causes me to resent humanity in a way that I really enjoy. So I can't say that I totally dislike what's going on here. Anyway, this person makes incoherent comments about why they have not gotten what they wanted when they asked for a third party. My brain just kind of leaks when I try to summarize this. They continue, another member of staff, they quote, this person has removed their account, so I won't dwell on it. They insist that they're really trying to fucking butter up the staff here. They're saying you seem like a reasonable person to a person who they obviously do not believe to be reasonable. They point out that they've made the process very clear that they literally could have just said, I'm sorry, I won't do it again, but instead it's this entire circus show. The person correctly recognizes the condescension and finally says, well, if you're going to keep threatening me like that, I'm just going to leave. And I'm also going to call you an idiot. And I think that this is really strange because they're obviously assuming that like they are understanding something about the social transaction. They're understanding that Magic Mountain is getting something out of this, which is absolutely true. Magic Mountain appears to enjoy their mild condescension. But they're greatly overestimating how much Magic Mountain wants to continue mildly condescending to them, because they think that Magic Mountain's going to beg them to come back now that they say they leave. But actually, no, they were banned. And in this case, while the ban was originally a pretext to get them to come back here for a quick lecture and an unban, now the ban is just escalated to an actual ban. It's not worth it to have them come back. So the ban is continued. That stays the same. They refer to the admin as a dumbass and a dumb person after all, and they threaten to expose that Goon Station are a bunch of jerks to their live stream. This is the strategy that a person like this uses. They start out with a variety of claims, some of which are clearly not true, and some of which could possibly be true, and they see, like, what will my audience accept? Eventually, they arrive on the story that their audience will stop disputing, or they, in this case, get chased out and mocked because they were not able to do that. Usually the people who engage in these evasions are trying to be somewhat convincing to the other person, but a person that they're essentially trying to convince is usually still themselves. There are people who can tell much better lies than other people. So we've got a poem here. I don't know if you like poetry. Maybe you don't like poetry. There's nothing wrong with that. But I want to bring it in because it includes some examples of really common strategies that are used for evasion by people who are being super duper evasive. It's by Dana Craig. It's The Narcissist's Prayer, and you'll just see it at the bottom of the screen here. I've just collected some of the most common evasions. One of them, of course, is this whole "that didn't happen" story, where I say that, the thing that you're accusing me of, I never did that. Nobody did that. You are hallucinating. Now, this is, of course, an evasion that doesn't hold up against the basic rejoinder of actually it did happen. I saw it. There are logs, there are screenshots. So I might switch from that to this slightly different rejoinder. This is a concession that it did happen, which is rough because if I'm emotionally committed to the idea that I didn't do the bad thing, I don't want to say that actually I did do the bad thing. Even if I'm just saying that it's not that bad, I'm admitting something. So this is very often the second rejoinder. And then you've got the third rejoinder, which is that it's not a big deal. This person has at this point admitted that people are deeply offended, but they've argued that the procedure that should be used for them isn't a procedure that has the effect of moderating them. The procedure that should be used for them is a procedure that has the effect of doing basically nothing. And then they switch to arguing that the other person started it. And you'll notice that simultaneously they switch to blaming the person who caused them to behave and to blaming the general audience. They don't just switch to blaming one person, they switch to blaming two people in a way that's not entirely logically consistent, because they're not just arguing that if it were super bad, they were provoked, so it's not their fault. They're arguing that they were provoked and also that it's not very bad. Now, it's not strictly impossible for both of those things to be true, but if one of those defenses is sufficient, they don't need the other one. So this is almost an admission that they realize these defenses won't be seen as individually sufficient. Of course, both of them aren't sufficient. So then they argue that they didn't deliberately do the thing, but that people did not adequately understand what their true intentions were. Their true intentions were not nearly as unkind. And from there, they insist that the other people are douchebags and therefore deserved what they did, which is to call them a slur. There's another evasion that doesn't appear in the original poem that I wanted to single out for this person, which is that this person in particular absolutely loves insisting that they have somehow gone to the wrong venue, or that the other person, while they may or may not be correct, should not be posting. The other person has gone to the wrong place. I find that really, really frustrating. I do not like it one bit, although I'm sure I make that very apparent. We've now been to space, and maybe we like space. Some people like space. I want to start now on the reason that I made this video. It's a really great story, or at least I happen to think it's a great story. It's about a web forum. Specifically, the web forum is the Dev Security Policy mailing list. Now, a mailing list is like a forum, but the way that a mailing list is actually implemented is that anybody who wants to can send emails to a certain address, and everybody else who monitors the mailing list will receive those emails back. That's what a mailing list looks like. It's in an envelope. So the Dev Security Policy mailing list is run by Mozilla. One of the people who posts on there is this man from the University of Calgary. That's his picture. If you stare at his website long enough, his picture gets replaced by a picture of some goats, which I assume are goats that he knows or goats that he likes. This is apparently his exact address. I didn't realize. He puts this on his website. I assume I'm okay to show this. Anyway, Jill Reardon, a great guy, presumably. The subject of this video is actually on his CV. It's this top element here, CVE 2022 23491. So that's going to be interesting. You might not know what any of those words mean. Certify is the name of a certificate database. Anyway, he made a very long post. It's so long that I'm not going to read the whole thing because that would be a lot. The gist of it, the central claim, well, no, this isn't the central claim. This is the background section. Measurement Systems is a spyware company banned by Google. People were putting their code into Android apps, and those Android apps, as a result, were hacking people's computers. Measurement Systems is owned by Vostrom. Vostrom owns Packet Forensics, which is a surveillance company. And the people involved in the surveillance company are these two individuals, Raymond and Wiley. Their names will, Raymond's name won't come up a whole lot. Wiley's name will actually come up several times. They own a few other things. In some cases, there was no logo for the company, so I had to make one up. Measurement Systems logo is this nice little tape measure. Vostrom Holdings logo is this blurry gradient that says Vostrom Holdings. The others are their actual logos. Message Safe is, of course, a way that you could send messages to people if you desired to do such a thing. There's also a few other corporate identities involved here, like Chivalric Holding Company, Frigate Bay Holding. Morally, these have a similar role to Vostrom, which is the holding company that they identified previously. Basically, there's just a lot of corporate identities for this same small group of people. So Message Safe is a secure webmail platform. It's not actually very secure. Like, all the testing that was done by this Joel dude implies that it basically delegates all the security to a server run by the Message Safe providers, which means that if Message Safe were run by evil people, your email could be read by evil people. This is very different from a provider like LavaBit, where LavaBit wasn't actually able to read your email. So we continue. We noticed that Wiley, who founded Message Safe, created a lot of these domain names that look a lot like existing providers. Like if you can't type messagesafe.io, maybe you can type hushemail.net or protonmails.com, which of course you might have intended to get Hushmail or Proton Mail, but this is better. Of course, these services actually provide the cryptography that he pretends to provide, or at least some of them do. So overall, very strange. This isn't something that a person who is the founder of, well, we'll get into what TrustCor is. This isn't something that we would expect from a security professional. We would expect it from the kind of security professional who goes to jail for the things they do as a security professional. So what is TrustCor? TrustCor is a root CA. You probably don't know, or maybe you do know what a root CA is. We have to get into what this is for. I said earlier something to the effect that this is a mailing list where you can talk to your friends about security. And while I'm sure nobody would stop you, the actual purpose of this mailing list is that people who work in the digital certificate industry will go to this mailing list and talk about digital certificate policy. This is a visual representation of, I guess, a man with a phone, an iPad, a Kindle device, and a certificate. I assume this man knows something about digital certificates. This is just from Google image search. I didn't look at the image before I used it. Anyway, the idea of a digital certificate is that it allows you as the provider of a service to prove that you are in fact the provider and that there's no middleman between you and your user. Let's say that I want to run an email service. Let's say I run Gmail, which is, Google's email service. If I do that, then I don't want the NSA to be able to say that they run Gmail. And to do so, or to prevent them rather, I publish a digital certificate that says, hi, Google has this certificate and you shouldn't trust the NSA if they say that they have this certificate. A root CA, well, a certificate authority is somebody who signs a certificate and says, this is the real certificate of so-and-so. So like, if I'm running Gmail, I might ask, realistically, I would ask Google, but I would ask a different department of Google to vouch that my certificate is the real certificate of Gmail. The root CA is the company that makes the certificate that comes with your laptop or your phone that it uses to validate that other certificates are real. In theory, a root CA can say, hey, this other company is also allowed to sign certificates. You should trust them. And that's what this middle step on the diagram is. But TrustCor is the blue node on this diagram that I borrowed from Google Images. So maybe that makes them very strong. Anyway, if you're a certificate authority, that is, if you're a root certificate authority, you have to post at dev security policy. That is the place where complaints about certificate authorities are raised. That is the place where Mozilla's certificate authority program is run. Mozilla, of course, runs a program that's used by several browsers, I believe including Safari, but obviously also including Chrome, or not Chrome, Firefox, excuse me. So if you do something bad, engineers on dev security policy will go there and ask you, what are you doing? And that will be from every browser company. So Joel Reardon is alleging something slightly different from, or sorry, he's alleging more than what I've mentioned. He's alleging something about TrustCor specifically. Packet Forensics is a company that claims to be able to break SSL. They're a lawful intercept company, which means that if you're a law enforcement company, or sorry, if you're a law enforcement department with a warrant, you could ask Packet Forensics to help you read somebody's traffic that they believed was secure. The only way that Packet Forensics could do this is if TrustCor is giving them forged certificates. Now, the exact chain of custody of those certificates is not totally clear. One of the ways that you could do this exploit, one of the ways you could forge TrustCor certificates is if at the point of time when TrustCor was founded, you made a copy of the base level certificate that TrustCor uses to do all of its work. Effectively, this would be equivalent to, imagine if you were born, the signature that you used to write checks was fixed with your birth. As a baby, it was decided what your signature would be like, and nobody else has that signature. This would effectively be cloning you as an infant with the goal of using your clone as a second person that can do the same job as you, but they can sign documents that you wouldn't have ordinarily signed. And if that metaphor is tortured, or if it seems tortured, well, that's because it is. Anyway, there's also a few other allegations. The exact spyware company that they were accusing of being run by the same people, there is significant evidence that that spyware company, Measurement Systems, was sharing code directly with MessageSafe. This is a set of posts by Sergey or maybe Serge Eagleman demonstrating that. And that's very odd, right? Like if they were separate entities, they wouldn't be sharing code like this. So clearly they are. There are some other comments. These are, I mean, I think they're funny. I think they're also somewhat relevant because TrustCor will, at many points in their marketing, insist that they are a Panamanian company. And while that is legally true, their servers are in Arizona. Their physical address is a UPS store, and it is not clear why they would have this structure. They are clearly doing business in America. While I'm at it, MessageSafe is claiming to be in Curacao, which they, for all I know, they might be. I wouldn't know. Anyway, there's also a Washington Post article. Joel decided to talk to a reporter, which is great for Joel. You'll notice that this article was updated several times throughout the day between 6 a.m. and 5:37 p.m. Part of why I cite the article so little in this is that it absorbs most of the content of the messaging thread, but it's worth looking at. So one of the things the article does is it cites an anonymous source familiar with the matter who asserts that MessageSafe and TrustCor are used to surveil people, and the certificates used or from TrustCor are being deployed against high-value targets for short time windows. That is, presumably, on occasion, law enforcement will forge a certificate for a website known to be used by somebody that they do not like, and they will use that to get access to the traffic that they're not supposed to. That seems really bad. The other thing the article alleges, by the way, is that Measurement Systems was deployed in a lot of apps targeted at Muslims, which is interesting and I think not very surprising. So we're going to introduce another character. Kathleen doesn't use her real face, so I'm not going to use her face to represent her. There's no real reason to. This is her resume. She has been working in digital certificate infrastructure since the concept of such a thing existed. I guess I would actually probably not quite that long, but since like 2000 and like 2000, I guess, maybe 2001, a long time. She runs Mozilla's program. She's a very important person. And she is grateful to Joel and Sergey and agrees with their findings and has some questions. Effectively, she's delivering an ultimatum. It's not a matter of the default course of action if TrustCor does nothing, which of course TrustCor being the same entity as MessageSafe and all these other companies. If they do nothing, they will be removed from the CA store. All certificates that they have ever sold will, well, okay, future certificates that they attempt to sell will not be valuable. Certificates that they've already sold may be distrusted at the discretion of browser vendors. Probably their certificates will be worthless, and certainly all of their users will jump ship within a year. Kathleen is also saying that if they are able to explain themselves, the ban might be revoked, although that's kind of stretching it because these accusations are really bad. Ryan also arrives. Ryan is a man of moderate importance on the Chrome security team. That's pretty great. He was at the time that he participated in this, he was very new to his role. Anyway, he responds with some threats, and he also points out that the auditor that they use is not actually licensed in any place other than the US. They are apparently, they might be fine because the data centers might be located in Phoenix, but this man's not sure. It's also observed that PAG doesn't actually audit any other CAs, which is interesting. And they use the same CA every year, which is a little bit worrying because, like, if you use the same auditor repeatedly, you will get cozy with the auditor, and the auditor may give you favors that you don't deserve. I'm editorializing here. These aren't things that Ryan comments on. These are things that leap out to me as somebody who has previously been exposed to compliance. The other thing is that TrustCor at some point registered this blatant phishing domain name. And that's really interesting, especially because TrustCor didn't actually reply to the cease and desist letters. It is, of course, observed that Wiley likes to register domains that look like other people's products. This is going to come back. Aside from that, yes, he agrees with the general findings that were made. He points out that the vast majority of certs offered by TrustCor are very short-term certs for dynamic DNS services. I think this is very interesting, and I don't know what to make of it. I guess one of the things that I make of it is that somebody who needs an SSL cert for dynamic DNS is doing something very unusual. I don't understand why this use case would exist. And of course, nowadays there are servers that do dynamic DNS and also proxying that have different security problems, but at least provide a version of SSL that requires you to trust the proxy. So his claims are very similar to Kathleen's. His language is, I think, a bit more intimidating. That's just my opinion. This is a sentence that appears, and I want to go back for a moment and just show where that sentence appears, because this sentence is going to come back. He's saying this about the use of MessageSafe, with the observation that MessageSafe appears to be popular with ransomware vendors. He would like TrustCor to stop participating. I think that the correct way to understand this sentence in context is that the man doesn't think that there is any inherent policy-based reason that it would be disqualifying for TrustCor to be running a webmail provider that is used by ransomware vendors. That is to say that, like, it's not, there's no rule that says a dog can't play basketball, but in practice, when you see a dog playing basketball, you have a lot of questions about that dog. So Rachel's another person who doesn't use her image. So for this particular slideshow, she's going to be represented by Conky the KDE Dragon, because I like Conky the KDE Dragon. She's the VP of Operations at TrustCor. I'm not sure what her title is at MessageSafe. She's going to consistently introduce herself as a TrustCor senior representative because that's what she's being asked to do in this thread. I don't think it's suspicious that she doesn't, that I don't know what her title is at MessageSafe. I honestly didn't look it up. I'm going to read her entire post. Hi, Joel and Serge. Interesting that this is the first time you or anyone else in your research group has reached out to us, except if you count the Washington Post journalist who claims in his article that we did not respond, which is one of the many false claims made in the article since we responded very quickly to his contact. And before I begin, you should probably clarify if your views are representing the University of Calgary's views, the University of California at Berkeley's views, or your personal commercial endeavor App Census's views, or your views representing any customer, agency, etc. If in fact these views are completely independent and personal, that is also helpful to note. For any of the technical details about MessageSafe.io's email software and service, that belongs in a different forum, as it is not related to CA operations or CA public policy based on your description. I know you guys promote some kind of app security solution commercially, but I did note in my earlier response that our company in MessageSafe has never shipped an app that was not in beta only, that the 5-year-old app beta was abandoned years ago and replaced with a mobile-first web experience that we think is really quite awesome on the phone browser itself, without having to install any app software, which is, as you guys well know, dangerous when it comes to navigating the third-party software that helps make apps easier to use or helps monetize them or whatever, but may also contain other stuff bad guys use for their own purposes. We abandoned mobile development years ago, as you can clearly tell, and instead of replacing it, we just suggest users make use of their built-in browsers only to use the service, which, as you can see for yourself, works amazingly well now based on React Native's mobile capabilities. This is by far the safest way to use the email app from what I've been told by the team, but again, in that other forum, please share your suggestions because, of course, we want to make it even better. I encourage you to follow those up with the MessageSafe.io directly via their customer support channels. I know for a fact they will be thrilled if you can provide any positive suggestions for improving that product suite. And thank you in advance for that. I know they get a lot of suggestions, but everything helps when it comes to making products better and more secure. I think that's one thing we all agree on. My suggestion is you don't start the conversation with them talking about an abandoned app beta from many years ago, except maybe to say remove it. Instead, focus on improving their production web application for mobile. Specific to your commentary on the certificate authority and policy pertinent to this forum, I appreciate that you recognize and stated multiple times throughout your post that you have found no evidence of TrustCor misissuing certificates or otherwise abusing our authority or violating established CA policies or root policies. We obviously agree. I'm going to comment on a few of your other points for the benefit of this forum, and then I suggest we take things offline, sideline at least, and either meet in person or have phone calls or professionally approach our discourse some other way without you guys using the media, your Twitter forces, or slinging more false claims, which isn't good for anyone, including the public that we both hope to serve. I'm not an attorney, but when a company registers itself as a corporate entity and lists its officers and addresses and mailing addresses and uses attorneys to do those things, oftentimes the company initially gets registered to the attorney or there, and then that information gets immediately obsoleted through amendments pointing to the real officers. I can tell you we don't have any crossover between our officers and the officers of the other companies we mentioned for certain. As for the ownership or beneficial shareholders of the company, the names you list are close but wrong. We've had the same beneficial owners for 7 years, and while their names are similar to the names you mentioned, they are not identical, and we have certainly never had any ownership from companies registered in the USA. As for the crossover between officers, I am perturbed as you because what that website is showing, open corporates, and probably what the government attorneys have in our records is absolutely not what exists in my files. So obviously it is my duty to reconcile this with the ownership and get it corrected, and most importantly, explained. Without having researched any of that, I will again refer to those other random USA companies that are not us and that were created in other jurisdictions 7 years after we were incorporated that sound similar to our ownership, and their potential for foul play against us in this way, along with the insurance information attempt I mentioned before. It looks like the real companies were there before, but were modified, and the attorneys and individuals were added to the record, whereas our records show slightly different names and without that individual. Again, I will reconcile and explain after I've done more research and compared these things on the complete timeline of events. Also, we are not in USA territory based on ownership, though, as you pointed out, we do host some equipment in the USA. I don't think it's common for companies to disclose where any of their critical hosting infrastructure is located, but yes, we have infrastructure in the USA and in the Caribbean, and our key locations are properly documented in our in our CA audits and insurance filings. When I read your comments about the company names and the domain name, it seems like we already explained this in our initial reply to the extent my attorney is comfortable with me explaining publicly, because we are concerned about follow-on civil lawsuits. Plainly stated, it looks like 7 or so years after we were founded, someone went and created companies with similar names. But instead of creating them where they belong and are already registered, they created them inside the USA. I don't know for a fact why anyone would do this. We certainly did not do it. Our attorneys believe someone could have done this, and it agrees with our event timeline we're creating as we investigate for physical actions taken and may have used this with insurance companies to obtain additional non-public information about our company and our insurance infrastructure, which is large and complicated, just like every CA's insurance has to be. When you pair that with someone also having a lookalike domain name, obviously that could be used for bad purposes, phishing, etc., against our clients or against us or against our vendors, I guess. That doesn't look like a good combination. It looks quite nasty, actually. When we realized our domain name was out there, we took legal action and we had asserted international trademark claims, and we were able to force the domain be sold to us, and we have it and use it today. Who would register those companies or domain or do these things to us, and why? That's beyond me, but none of it sounds like good behavior to me or to our attorneys. If you guys have any actual evidence of better ideas as to how these could have been used, I'd like to share that with our attorneys. I think I've hit on all the big points I can talk about publicly. Obviously, I can't comment on prior, whether deceased or not, employees, etc. Oh, and on our own domain ownership or prior employee domain ownership, frankly, that again has to do with that message safe email product and not CA operations. But our customers in the company and prior and current employees, etc., all register domains through it by the hundreds or thousands there are at some level of provisioning or not. And we really can't be responsible for what they all register. Certainly, if any violate any guidelines, we try to handle that on an individual case basis, but hopefully abuse is kept to a minimum, and we have a lot of protections built in, like checking against Alexa top sites, and other things CAs do operationally as part of the business. Some, but not all of these protections are extended to the message safe email product, but that can be blurry because people register some really weird domains quite naturally, and without any malice that contain weird words or substrings or whatever. As I said, happy we are take this offline with our CA operational partners and fellow root program stakeholders and administrators, etc. Thank you, everyone. Rachel. Please note, this message is not in direct reply to Kathleen's message that just came in. We have not yet had time to absorb her post, and will reply to Kathleen's message on all mentioned points within the time frame allotted. However, we did not feel the need to delay our response to Joel and Serge. So there's a lot of claims in there. I think that there's a few that I want to specifically highlight. One of them is that the companies, at least the ones in the US that have similar names to her companies, don't share officers and were instead founded by her enemies who want to obtain secrets by impersonating her. Also, they do have presence in Panama, Canada, and the USA, and as will later be divulged in Curacao, which is where MessageSafe operates. That's just openly on MessageSafe's website. I just didn't catch a post that happened to mention that. But what's actually going on here? Because this is a hell of a post. For one thing, are TrustCor and MessageSafe affiliated? I think that it's not entirely clear if she's asserting that they're not. I think the closest thing that she's asserting is that for some pair of companies mentioned by Joel, and there aren't that many pairs of companies that were mentioned at this point in the thread. You may have seen the list of corporate names that I posted earlier. That's actually from much later in the thread. At this point, the 4 companies that have been directly mentioned by Joel are MessageSafe, TrustCor, Vostrum, and what's the other one? MessageSafe, TrustCor, Vostrum. There's a fucking third one. Measurement Systems. That's it. Those are the 4 companies. They do not have similar names in the sense that the companies have similar names. They do have similar names in that the officers have similar names and identical residential addresses. So that's interesting, right? That they're saying that there's no affiliation when there are identical residential addresses. I think that it should be taken to mean that inside the house of Raymond Solino, there is a second man named Raymond Solino with a different middle name who owns a different company and operates it completely separately. Now, obviously, that's not true, but that is, I think, what she is asserting. She also seems to be confused about what the list is. I think that one of the things I'm understanding is that Joel runs something called App Census, and she seems to believe that there is some affiliation between this list and Joel's self-promotional efforts as the person who runs this thing. I'm not entirely sure what App Census is, and I am honestly speculating because she does not clarify what she means when she implies that he has a commercial interest. She repeatedly insists this should be taken to some other venue, which is a problem because this is the venue. This is where you litigate this thing. This is where people file and discuss complaints. She should know as a part of her job that she has to post here, and shame on her for not knowing that. She also makes a variety of claims that would be surprising to security professionals. Among other things, she claims that companies that do this kind of business don't divulge what country their infrastructure is located in, which is surprising because information technology infrastructure is inherently regional. If you were to host your thing in Panama and a country were to introduce a geo-block against the US, that geo-block would not necessarily affect Panama. It's one of those things where it's so obvious that it would need to be divulged that, like, I can't think of a thing to cite that would be informative in explaining why it needs to be divulged. I suppose that one of the things that I can point out is that for the vast majority of internet provided services, it would be possible to gain some of this information. Like, it would be possible to know that Google hosts servers in the US by contacting Google because you would be hitting an American IP address. For certificate authority, that's not really true because all of the work done by a certificate authority can be done via middlemen, meaning that the country where the final hop, where the cert is actually stored is, that's potentially not knowable to the end user. It's entirely possible somebody could have falsely believed that they were based in Panama or Canada or Curacao, wherever they are. Anyway, she's doing great, or at least I think she's doing great. She seems to have noticed a large number of comments about message safe, and she is doing something that I could interpret earnestly. And if I interpret it earnestly, the thing that I would say she is doing is that she is attempting to solicit feedback on message safe and also to hype message safe's product, which to me strikes me as like very unnecessary. I also think that if I interpret it like disingenuously, she realizes that message safe complaints are really bad character evidence against TrustCor because message safe is very obviously not run very competently. It doesn't actually provide E2E encryption, for instance, and this is discussed extensively in the thread. I haven't included the like 20 or so posts litigating that. Suffice it to say that it is absolutely proven that message safe does not provide working E2E encryption and that message safe does have access to users' messages. It's not proven that they do anything unethical with that access, but they absolutely 100% have it. Anyway, she doesn't seem to want them to litigate message safe here, and that's a problem. Basically, the argument being made by everybody else is that they appear to be abusing TLS certs based on the other business done by similar officers, and message safe appears to be a shit show in a way that nothing run by a CA should be. We have some responses from other participants in the process. Actually, I forgot to write down exactly who this is before Clint Wilson. Clint Wilson is from Apple's program. The person before this, I want to say they're from Google. I should have written down who they were. I'm so sorry that I didn't. I say this while I take a quick look. The gist of it is these are other participants in the network. Rachel replies to a variety of complaints. Oh, I think that's Ryan. I assume, yeah, that's Ryan from Google. That's it. I couldn't remember who it was. Yes. So, okay, Rachel is responding to the others in the way that she does. She starts with a big hearty thank you. And do I read this? I think I have to read this. Kathleen, Ryan, Clint, and the rest of the community. Read Mozilla, Google, Apple, and the rest of the community. I was reminded by some of you, this is a big public forum with non-CA operators and non-browser/platform developers present, and that participants have a lot of interest in these topics, but not always the same level of experience or familiarity with the CA operations and root CA program guidelines or technical know-how as the intended audience. Therefore, let me begin by saying thank you to my fellow CA/B forum members and members of the larger community for reminding me of that. And separately, thank you for those of you that have sent very nice and encouraging supportive emails. You know who you are. I appreciate working with many of you for many years, and your positive messages were very meaningful and heartfelt. Given the publicity of this forum, I will do my best to respect individuals by not constantly using their names or calling out other root program member organizations as examples, even when it would be helpful to do so. Instead, I will ask you to consider that aspect in my response. Also, I will use our company when speaking of TrustCor, the CA operator, and MessageSafe, the email service. I will use the researchers when speaking about Sir Gentleman, Joel Reardon, their commercial enterprise app census, or the universities for which they work, UC Berkeley and the University of Calgary, respectively. And I want to point out a few specific things here. One of them is that she has listed the only people that she shows an interest in responding to are the people in the thread who literally run or have the ability to make authoritative decisions for CA programs. She has implied a genuine lack of interest in the others. She has received many encouraging, supportive emails. I'm sure of this. It's of course been about 10 days since the initial article, so it's probable that she spent 10 days on genuinely stressful damage control. She's probably not in the best state of mind at this point. Anyway, she feels the need to remind people of Surgeon Joel's affiliation with App Census, which is some kind of commercial security project that she accuses them of promoting. Which I suppose I can't be that unkind to her for mentioning it because it is true. I'm not going to read the rest of this one, by the way. I think that there's a lot here. Oh, there is one other thing. She's threatening to call out other programs for being run in a way that would make them an example that she could speak negatively of. She's implying that their negative thing is that she's not saying about other programs. Yeah, so this goes on. This is about a third of it. Goes on for probably like 12 to 16 real pages of paper. There's also an addendum from Wiley, though I didn't actually see it in the thread, so I'm not sure if it was actually attached. I assume it was intended to be. So she's claiming that MessageSafe is not affiliated with measurement systems, or rather that TrustCor, which actually this is really strange. She said our company. I assume by our company she means TrustCor / MessageSafe, because she has referred to them in her initial post as if they are the same. Anyway, they're not related to measurement systems or packet forensics. Fuck, I knew there was a fifth one that I forgot to mention. Measurement systems and packet forensics are different companies that both do unethical things, and I've already failed to get them straight. Anyway, shareholders don't control their CA operations because that would be illegal. If they did something bad, that wouldn't be TrustCor's problem, which is true. But if they did something bad that imposed a breach on TrustCor, that would be TrustCor's problem. Like, one of the accusations is that Packet Forensics just straight up has TrustCor's root cert, meaning that Packet Forensics would be able to mint certificates as if they were TrustCor, and TrustCor would have no knowledge of this. That would be really, really bad. That would be extremely bad. And while it would not be her fault exactly, because as will be established later, she acquired TrustCor after its founding, it would be her problem. Anyway, her best guess is that the reason they have an unobfuscated version of the SDK is that the developments of measurement systems accidentally distributed an unobfuscated version of their SDK specifically to her, or well, specifically to her company. I don't think this is that likely, but I don't think it's literally impossible. She believes that the investors, which the companies share a very similar pool of investors, but insists that they're all passive except Ian Abramovitz. This is a very slimy rhetorical move that I really dislike. She asserts that they're all passive except for Ian, as if that addresses the accusation. And the rhetorical form of this implies that it addresses the accusation. The problem is that if Ian's not passive and he runs both, that is exactly the accusation. That is exactly what she's being accused of. And I find that very worrying. And I think that she should find that very worrying too, because it affects her job. Anyway, okay, they're all passive except for Ian. Good for Ian. Anyway, also, this is mentioned in the post. Ian died. That's very unfortunate for Ian. Their address is a UPS site in Canada. This is part of their remote work policy of having an address that is a UPS site instead of an office. They do clarify that they do a lot of their actual work from Phoenix, which is great. That's good for them. The auditors are only licensed in Phoenix, but that thing they said where they had infrastructure in the Caribbean was actually not true. They only have infrastructure in Arizona. I suppose that you could argue over whether the sentence is true. They said that they have infrastructure in Arizona and the Caribbean, and I suppose that Arizona is a subset of Arizona and the Caribbean, in the same way that I could argue that I live in California and in Mexico, because I live in California, and California is a subset of California and Mexico. However, I think this is disingenuous, and in fact, they have tried to give a false they've tried to falsely present that their central infrastructure is in Curacao and Panama, when all infrastructure that they have admitted to having so far is in Phoenix, Arizona. Same city as E621, by the way, if I recall correctly. Anyway, there were some spooky domains. You might remember that Ryan pointed out they had registered some kind of BF Goodrich affiliated domain that looked like it had been used for phishing. Anyway, when they acquired MessageSafe, which apparently when they acquired Decoy Mail, which they converted into MessageSafe, Decoy Mail had the ability to register domains in some way. I'm probably not understanding this exactly right. It is incredibly sophisticated and sufficiently complex, she points out. So maybe if you find that sufficient complexity to explain this, you could register a domain, and then that domain could potentially be used for phishing, I guess. I don't understand it. Anyway, also, like, some of the domains in some account, it's not clear which, were held by a personal account of one of the original shareholders. I don't understand what she's saying here. It seems like she's arguing that, like, there are 3 accounts. One is the account of Wiley, which is what Wiley used to register his own domains. One of them is the new account of MessageSafe, which is where their current domains are. Another is the old account of Decoy Mail. And then I guess there's this 4th account, which is the account of a Decoy Mail shareholder, but that 4th account might be the same as the 3rd account, because there might have been Decoy Mail customer domains in the account of that shareholder, because this incredibly sophisticated system was incapable of adequately transferring the domains that it had been used to sell. Anyway, Wiley, of course, did in fact buy those domains because he wanted to, and because in 2016, it was a common practice to typo squat on competitors' domains. The idea that the internet was just a Wild West back then might have been defensible if we were talking about 2000, which is when they acquired Decoy Mail. But we're actually talking about MessageSafe, we're talking about 2016, which is much later than 2000. And at this time, this was like fucking Ask Jeeves had stopped doing this ages ago. I guess they'd stopped existing ages ago. This is not a usual thing to do in 2016. It's not a thing that any responsible company would ever do. Also, another leader move in innovation for us, worth noting along these lines, is we have implemented a completely automated account closure system for the most heinous abuses, where we believe a human in the loop is not necessary, such as spam, also a policy violation. You cannot effectively send high-volume phishing or spam through MessageSafe using a combination of automated account creation and or high-volume message sending because of built-in rate limiting. However, we took an extra step to check constantly for receive rate abuses when spammers send mail through another high-volume spam sending system such as Gmail and use a MessageSafe.io email as their reply to address or in their return path, and when that rate limit is reached, indicating they did not spam through us but still violated our policy since a MessageSafe email address was used as an aspect of sending spam through someone else, our automated system closes their account for policy violation and automatically begins returning a helpful and informative error message next time someone sends to their MessageSafe.io account, letting everyone involved, victims, account holders, or friends, their account was closed due to abuse. Also, to quote Ryan, TrustCor's service offering should not be considered a representation of the service or TrustCor itself. That is not what Ryan said, for the record. What Ryan said is quite a few slides ago at this point. We'll find what Ryan said. Bad actors' use of, and then it's the same sentence. Bad actors' use of TrustCor service offerings should not be considered a representation of the service or TrustCor itself. I think that's pretty great. I do. Oh God, I have so many slides here. What am I doing with all these slides? She has badly misquoted Ryan. So there is not, in fact, a separate venue, and it is not wrong for, like, Joel and Serge to run their own company that does security research, and as part of that security research, discover a security problem. She will continue to evade throughout the posts by insisting that the events happened a long time ago. The death of Ian makes it hard to understand. A relative of Ian has some executive level role. I forget which, but that's established in the thread. So that's just great. Anyway, Watson Ladd is a security professional who observes that her "I am not accused of misissuance" t-shirt is raising questions answered by her t-shirt. He also observes, and I'll read his response as well because I think that it's a fantastic response. TrustCor CA is a company in Canada wholly owned and operated by TrustCor, a Panamanian company operating in a money laundering haven with weak rule of law. TrustCor also owns MessageSafe, which it operates in Curacao. But TrustCor CA isn't adverse to locating business operations in the US, a country which, along with Canada, has a functioning and trusted court system. So why exactly should I trust TrustCor with the safety of every site on the internet? What's wrong with Canada or Arizona? Why Panama? What he's implying is that they benefit from being in Panama for reasons that are probably not ethical. He doesn't say what they are. He deeply hates that TrustCor, in the response that I did not read especially, repeatedly evaded basic questions about why they had done things, where they had obtained code. We also have messages from Kurt. Kurt is deeply rude in a way that I repeatedly appreciate. I deeply enjoy his response to the classic TV show Cops here, which I will save time by not immediately reading. It is not clear exactly what TrustCor's corporate structure is at this point. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I've skipped parts of it because I can't make sense of it. Their corporate structure is deeply complicated and incoherent. Filippo observes that their responses have made it much harder to trust them because their responses are so deeply evasive, which is absolutely true. Watson and Filippo have delivered these comments. Cynthia apparently agrees with them. Why did I include? I guess I just included everybody concurring with these guys. I'm sorry, it's a lot of dudes. There's a whole other debacle that I'm not going to summarize in screenshots. The gist of it is that TrustCor also shared code with Measurement Systems, and Measurement Systems was sending traffic to a server hosted by MessageSafe. Rachel claims, via a remarkably implausible story, that an evil contractor must have effectively set up an outpost of Measurement Systems inside of MessageSafe's infrastructure in order to collect the data that Measurement Systems would have otherwise been picking up anyway. At this point, the obvious story is that MessageSafe and Measurement Systems do not have a strong barrier between their code bases. They freely share code and information with each other, including certificates. So Kathleen postpones the ban, not for any reason that I know. She then actually does the ban, which is predictable because between these times, nothing useful or nothing that would tend to exonerate TrustCor occurs. The ban is not retroactive, meaning that the certificates that TrustCor has already issued are still good. At least I believe that's true. I think that's true. Anyway, TrustCor can transfer their business to another company. They can no longer make certificates that are valid. If they were to issue certificates in the past as a way to bypass the non-retroactiveness of the ban would become retroactive. Sorry, I can phrase that better. Imagine if I said, okay, you're not allowed to write any more. You're not allowed to sign any more checks, but all the checks that you've signed are still valid. If I were to then start backdating my checks so I could sign more of them, that would be an example of violating this rule. Anyway, Rachel is very sad. Rachel notices that Microsoft's ban actually was retroactive, which I think was a reasonable call from Microsoft because I think TrustCor's behavior was obviously terrible. Or at least MessageSafe's behavior was, and MessageSafe and TrustCor don't appear to be separate entities. It's a little odd because MessageSafe is the only entity that Rachel ever characterizes as taking any specific actions. TrustCor just kind of exists as a product. It feels like Rachel both wants MessageSafe not to be discussed and attributes every action by TrustCor to MessageSafe as a deflection, which feels very much like the demands for a third party in the previous thread. Everything that is in principle relevant is irrelevant because of some procedural issue, and the procedural issue insists that that information is irrelevant because the procedure should have been taken in a different venue. Therefore, anything that is in this venue should have been in this other venue, and anything that is in this other venue should not have been discussed in the first place. So nothing can be done. Anyway, Microsoft imposes a retroactive ban. There's an annoyed comment from Kurt insisting that she shouldn't be demanding anything from. Well, wait, we don't have Kurt's comment here. We'll have it later, or maybe we won't have it at all. Chris from Chrome, this is a different guy from Chrome, schedules a ban for March, which basically means they can continue doing business for about 4 months. However, the certificates that they issue will have retroactively expired at that point. I guess it's not truly retroactive, but in March, certificates that she issues in November will still not be trusted. This is, I guess, another flavor of this is the delayed retroactive ban, basically. Here's Kurt being rude to her about her demand that Microsoft not do a retroactive ban. He wants her to post more. He asserts that there are reasons that she should, but I think that his actual reason is just that he would like to see more posts from her because her posts are weird and funny. So we'll just carry on into her last post. Serge, you guys found an easily explained domain name and then basically assumed the rest and used opinions, circumstantial evidence, conjecture, and fear-mongering to push readers of a mailing list to ignore the fact that we've never done anything wrong. Misissuance, reading people's emails, intentionally distributing malware. Intentionally is an interesting word. We've done none of those things. Answering factually and legally carefully also fell on deaf ears, and the event was sensationalized because scandal has a larger audience than security, and it always has. And now all it takes is making up a scandal, which has the same effect. For those reasons, and because I stated this such clearly and repeatedly in my public responses to you, we are not going to drag other companies' names through the mud and expose them to the same biased, unfair, and business-damaging scrutiny you desire to keep your name in the media and draw attention to your company. Again, you want to defer to university research, but in reality, you posted all this stuff on your company blog and announced the link to the company blog entry everywhere. Anyway, I'm not going to get into your personal saga. My point is simply that we didn't get a fair experience, and we won't bring others into that unfair experience because we don't believe it's in the public interest. Another factor I'll offer is that even if a company, unlike us, is really owned by a defense contractor or government, it doesn't mean they're bad or that they'd misbehave. You've probably flown inside an aircraft or driven a car with systems developed by primarily government-funded companies and enjoyed the safety and reliability they offer. So I'm saying that doesn't make them bad, and especially in those cases, dragging them through the mud here would not serve the public interest. Also, maybe neither of us are any good at deciding what's in the public interest, because this same group that you think cares about these things is the group that allowed the Chinese government to place certificates in the root store long after the Great Firewall was public and long after ample publication about their history of transgressions involving freedom of expression and human rights violations. And this stayed in place until there were obvious public violations by that government. So I guess it's a confusing topic and people don't really care about the things you or I may believe may be important, or at least people's priorities are different. If you fellas are good at research, you'll be able to figure that out yourselves. I mean, the fact that you haven't already done that and instead just focused on just one company whose domain name you found doing something unrelated is silly, and just further reinforces the point that you randomly came across a domain in other research and then misused that to motivate incorrect action upon us. The point is, many of these other cases are apparent and far more simple / straightforward, not to mention they're actually accurate compared to your biased assessment of our company. But I'd encourage you not to do that research because, like us, they've not done anything wrong either so far as the public is concerned. Otherwise, they'd have been removed long ago, I imagine. This group was quick to remove us without reasonable evidence and with no history of wrongdoing. So I imagine they'd be even more quick to remove any company that showed any real evidence of actual wrongdoing. In summary, if you want to go hunt these companies down, it's easy if you're studious, and it certainly doesn't take any funded university research or company resources. It just takes the ability to use a search engine and look at various backgrounds and public documents. For all the reasons we've already stated, we're not under any circumstances going to provide a list of our beliefs and opinions to cause inappropriate public scrutiny or to create bias against these organizations. That's your business promotion strategy, not ours. Happy holidays, Rachel. So, I think it's very likely that TrustCor was in fact leaking certificates to packet forensics, which I keep confusing with measurement systems. I'm sorry, I keep doing that. I think it's very likely that they were doing that because otherwise I don't see how packet forensics could have, like, for over 10 years been doing that. I don't see how they could have done it without a compromised cert. There is a new security feature that mitigates the attack, but it wasn't in place on Firefox at the time. And that means that they probably could have surveilled people who were either on very old browsers like Internet Explorer or who just weren't using Chrome, which of course was a very popular browser at that time, but it wasn't a monoculture. I have no idea if Safari was using certificate transparency at this time. I should probably check, but I haven't. One of the things that I noticed is that throughout her post, she repeatedly refers to the idea that she has an attorney that's telling her what she's allowed to say. And I think it's fascinating that she produced these posts with a third party telling her what she was allowed to say, because I think that a third party would have resulted in posts that were less strange than this. But when I thought about this a little more, I realized, well, okay, for starters, actually, before I mention that, I've apparently put these in the wrong order. She seems to think it was a PR incident, but the other thing is that I don't think that I think it's very likely that her attorney may have contributed to the badness of these statements. I think that Rachel is, in fact, highly technically literate. And that's one of the things that confuses me, because you'd think that given that she's highly technically literate based on her responses, she probably would have had better ones. On the other hand, I think that the approach that you would normally use is to not admit a single thing that the other person can't prove, which in practice amounts to exactly the kind of deflection that I observed in the narcissist's prayer. When somebody sues you for something, the very first thing that you do in response is you file a motion to dismiss. You say, this should not even be in the court, and I don't have to tell you why. It is the venue objection that I've told you. That's not entirely true. You do have to provide some reason that it should be dismissed, but the reason can be total boilerplate. The reason will generally amount to, I didn't do that. They didn't say that. They didn't show that I did it. So you'd better show that I did. The policies of the dev security policy mailing list, whose name I'm probably getting wrong. Let me check what it's named. No, it is dev security policy. I was worried I'd scramble the order of those words. The policy there is that you don't get a second chance to tell the truth. Whereas the policy in court is that you get many chances to tell the truth, and you get a full account of what the other person believes about you before you even reply. And that makes me think that some of the problems in this are exactly the problems that a lawyer could create for Rachel, even though these are also problems that could salvage Rachel. One of the things that I noticed when I compare this to the narcissist's prayer, the list of deflections that I used earlier in this video, one of the things that I noticed is that she never actually gets to the stages that involve an increasing level of admission. She continually floats around the stages that assert that she is the true victim of the situation, and that assert that if she did the thing, it wasn't a big deal, but she didn't. It's very different, because you would expect that a person who is arguing naturalistically would ultimately admit to the things that they are being accused of, when it's beyond plausibility that those things are not true. Anyway, I wish her a lot of luck and happiness, because I think that at least some elements of this situation genuinely may not have been her fault. She acquired the company long after it was founded, and I think that it is very likely that the PKI, that is the certificate issuing infrastructure, I think it's very likely that that was already compromised at the time that she became an officer of the company. And it is likely that in her mind, it doesn't make sense that packet forensics could be doing the thing that they're accused of being able to do. And in fact, the only evidence we have of packet forensics doing this thing is an anonymous whistleblower that spoke to the Washington Post. Unfortunately, we will never have exact evidence that packet forensics was capable of doing what they said they could. Beyond that, it wouldn't make sense for a vendor like that to exist for such a long time and to have ongoing defense contracts. This is discussed in the WAPO article. It wouldn't make sense for them to exist for so long as a vendor with ongoing contracts if they couldn't do any of the things that they asserted. I still have to conclude that, like, TrustCor, if not actual TrustCor, but the fork of TrustCor that existed in packet forensics may have been the pocket CA of an intelligence agency for the 10-year period during which packet forensics was completing contracts. And that's a very frightening thought. It's exactly the thought that would lead to the breach that we expect. Of course, we know that the algorithms that provide TLS, the secure networking protocol that uses these certificates, we know that the breaches we know that they're hard to breach, or at least we strongly suspect it. We still think that they're good algorithms. We certainly think that our symmetric crypto is good. So this kind of attack is the kind of attack that we think is the most likely to actually work. I would be very surprised if this was the last CA with these security practices. I don't know when we'll find the next one, and I don't know if that one will be an American CA. There are certainly other CAs that have gone up in flames, OnTrust being a recent one. I suppose it's just a matter of time until that happens, and I'd be lying if I said that I had absolutely no opinions. But officially, I have no opinions. Also, I really like this particular dragon, and I thought that you should see them one more time before I leave you. That's it.